a lot of people presumed that we had stores first and then we went the other way around. But actually, when I first developed a website, it was before Mothercare, and Mothercare was the biggest mass market retailer in our niche market sector. It was literally a friend of mine said to me, you ought to have a website. And I literally said, what's that? It was that early on. And I just knew that I couldn't really run a company any other way. So I actually thought, well, the truth is either I have to give up Jojo or Jojo will kill me. And so that's kind of what happened. And it was really hard. I suddenly, after Jojo, I knew I was going to do something. I wasn't quite sure what, and I needed to learn to breathe again. And I just found that when I came up to the farm and I would sort of be designing new gardens, because I do all the design up here, I would come up here and I just learned to breathe.
Hello and welcome to Inspired Sounds, Rathbones' exclusive podcast dedicated to supporting and empowering entrepreneurs. In each episode, we dive into the journey of inspirational entrepreneurs and founders who we invite to share the thrills and spills of their own journey. We hope you enjoy listening.
Hello and welcome to Inspired Sounds. I'm Rebecca Tunstall, one of the investment directors at Rathbones. I'm delighted to be joined today by Laura Tenison of Jojo Maman Bébé. Laura, welcome. Tell us a little bit about how you started the idea of this business, which has become so incredibly popular, and every single one of our listeners will have heard of it.
Okay, so obviously Jojo was my last business, and actually it was my third business. So I guess I am a serial entrepreneur, but I had a bit of a gap where I ran Jojo for 29 years. So that was quite a long process, staying with that company. Jojo started really from the wish to get back into fashion. I'd been making and selling clothes, initially for myself, then for friends and family, and then I started selling them to other people really since my teenage years. I'd started I think when I was still at school, so when I was probably about 16, a business making men's clothes, which I did for a couple of years. But I found that it was very difficult to scale the business. It was very high end, made to measure, and it was high end. So I decided to go and do something else, and I spent a couple of years traveling around the Middle East. I went to Damascus to look for silk. I was working with very beautiful silk fabrics at the time, and then on to India. I spent 6 months in India, and I always had a purpose with my traveling. So whilst I was sort of basically backpacking, I also had a purpose. And I was looking for factories and suppliers for my fashion company. But I realized that actually menswear was problematical. So I decided to go and give myself go and work for another company. And I worked for a British manufacturer retailer. So I learned a little bit more about the retail side of the company. And after doing that for a bit, I thought I really need to get back into fashion. And I wrote a business plan, went to about 5 high street banks. No one would give me any cash to start the business. So frustrated, I decided to launch a service industry, because you can start a service industry with very little cash. You basically do some marketing, a little bit of marketing, find a couple of clients, and I became a builder in France. And it's a bit of a sort of transition from one to the other. But, so the next 3 years I spent building up a French property agency where I would find houses for my clients and renovate them with local tradesmen. And I learned so much about building. And ironically, once I'd done that for a bit and I sold that business as a going concern, wanted to come back into fashion, I ironically had really good skill sets, because by then I could manufacture clothes. I knew a lot about building work, and it meant that when I did come back into retail, I was actually able to do a lot of the property finding and do the sort of building surveys on the properties when we were looking for stores. So I then had a head-on collision car crash while selling my business in France, broke about 20 bones in my body, was air ambulance back to the UK, where I spent a few weeks in hospital. And whilst that could have been seen as a kind of a problem, and in fact it's definitely with a pair of crutches in my front hall that when my knees flare up and I have problems with my bones at various times, I'm back on the crutches. But it actually also taught me to go down the children's wear route. I didn't have children of my own, but my ward neighbour in St Thomas's Hospital in Chelsea with an amazing view over the Thames, the Houses of Parliament. She was a young mum. She was very seriously ill, and she would complain to me that her children, she couldn't find anything nice to dress her children in. So that kind of sparked the idea for Jojo. And having worked in France doing my French property business, I'd come to really love the outdoors. So I hated the way that in the UK, people would say, oh, we can't go out today. We can't go to the park because it's raining. And I thought that's absolutely ridiculous. Even more fun to go to the park when it's raining, go splash in puddles as a little kid. So I didn't have my own children, but in a way that gave me great freedom to kind of design with no restrictions. And I came up with lots of kind of practical ideas and solutions for parents. And kind of Jojo really started as a tiny business with me making the first samples, going around trade fairs, finding factories. In fact, some of my first factories were in really obscure places because I was making very small quantities. One of my first countries that I worked with closely was Colombia, because I found a group of Colombian fashion factory owners who wanted to start importing into the EU. And in those days, of course, the biggest export of Colombia was cocaine. The EU had funded these factory owners to come and exhibit at the trade fair in Paris, and no one was giving them any orders. And I sort of pitched up and said, well, look, these are my designs. This is the sort of things I want to make, but I could only make 50 pieces of a style. And they were like so delighted that someone had showed some interest in them that the next week I was on a plane to Colombia and an overnight bus to Cali, and there I was manufacturing in the cocaine capital of the world, but it was baby grows instead of drugs. So actually, life takes funny twists, doesn't it? So I kind of really fell into starting and running Jojo through a series of circumstances.
I mean, absolutely incredible story. Definitely not one I've heard before. Can you talk us through some of the sort of challenges that you faced? Because you grew it to be a very large business. And I imagine coming from the initial idea and going out to Colombia, there was a very long journey between that and where you got to. Just for some of the listeners, could you talk through some of the challenges that you faced and how you overcame them during your growth phase?
Well, I think the growth phase is a tricky one because you're kind of deviled if it's the devil if you don't grow, but also growing too fast is a complete sort of logistical nightmare as well. And there were times when we happened to capture the imagination of the public one way or the other, and would be really successful. And I would have bought 50 pieces of a style, and we would have several hundred orders come in. So then we try and place repeat orders. But, we were making children's wear and maternity wear as well. I mean, in the early days, there were times when the deliveries were so delayed and the orders came in so fast. Those were the days a long time ago when before Amazon Prime became the benchmark that everyone aspired to, doing next day delivery. But in those days, there was a policy of allow 28 days for delivery. Now, if you're manufacturing in this country, you can probably get those orders sort of replenished in that time. If you're manufacturing in the Far East or in South America, that's a little bit harder. There were times when the orders were so delayed that people were literally giving birth before they got their maternity wear.
Oh, God.
So, it wasn't all plain sailing. But we did, I think one of the things that probably made us stand out from the crowd, and of course in those days there were very few niche market retailers. It was just the beginning of niche market retail. The most of the competition were much larger mass market companies, the sort of Freemans of this world. It was the early days of Next even. George Davis was just setting up his sort of Magalog, and that kind of niche market catalogue was very unknown. So I was in the right place at the right time. There were a couple of other companies doing it as well. They obviously, we obviously did it better than them in order to grow the market to where we were, because we did grow into being the biggest independent mother and baby brand in the country.
Yeah.
But during that time, a lot of other companies fell by the wayside, and retail companies do come and go. It's a great place to be if you're young, ambitious, passionate, energetic, and you've got a niche market that other people aren't really fulfilling very well, because you don't necessarily need to reinvent the wheel. You just need to make a better wheel than your competition.
And do you think that's the thing? Because retail, like you said, is quite a hard place to be, and a lot of firms do fall by the wayside. What do you credit your success to? Do you think it is having a slightly different ideas?
Yeah, I mean, we were always innovative in that we were a catalogue first, and we had a website site before we opened stores. And a lot of people presumed that we had stores first and then we went the other way around. But actually, when I first developed a website, it was before Mothercare, and Mothercare was the biggest sort of mass market retailer in our niche market sector. And when I developed a website, it was literally a friend of mine said to me, "You ought to have a website." And I literally said, "What's that?" It was that early on. And in those first couple of years of us having a website, all our web customers were men, because women, it's just inconceivable nowadays. But women, the only people who went on websites were very techie, sort of computer engineers and software developers. And it was, and of course, some computer software engineers have families, and they would be sort of looking for opportunities to help their partners. But it was really interesting, because we had two things that we always did. We were always innovative, always prepared. As a private company, really, really fast to market. So I would have an idea, and later on my design team would have ideas. But in those early years, it was really me for the first 10 years or so. And then we bring it to market as quickly as possible. And we really pushed the boundaries. And sometimes we fell foul of things like trading standards, or, I remember the first time that we introduced baby sleeping bags into this country. I did it. By then I had my own children. The first 3 years of the company, I didn't have children. And then I had my own children, which gave me even more ideas, because I was living through the situation with my children. And just finding practical products to make parenting a little bit easier was just something that just happened on a nightly basis. The things that wakes you up in the night is when your child kicks off the covers and gets cold. And so, putting your child in a sleeping bag is just the obvious. And I'd seen sleeping bags in France, but at the same time, the British had a very high rate of cot deaths, much higher than some parts of Europe. And the trading standards thought that babies overheating could be a contributing factor. And they came in and they impounded my sleeping bags. And then there was a whole process that went on over the next few years of giving TOG ratings and things like that to sleeping bags to make sure that parents had but actually it was discovered that it was nothing to do with the sleeping bags at all. But I do remember trading standards coming in and sort of impounding my whole supply of sleeping bags when parents were desperate for them.
Yeah.
So, we were at the right place at the right time, where we could come up with ideas. Sometimes I'd seen it in other parts of the world. Sometimes I worked with in an innovative sort of designers. I remember the first time we sold it was called the Anyway Up cup. It was a sippy cup that had a non-return valve. So when my children were little, when they used to give them a little drink or whatever, I'd give them a bottle, I'd give them a cup, but everything went everywhere. It was a real mess. And this non-return valve was designed by a lady in Bristol, and she set up a company called the Haberman Company. And I remember we became like an exclusive stockist for her for the first sort of 6 months when she designed this product. And we sold thousands. And again, there were many. In fact, can't remember where I was walking around the other day. I was walking somewhere, and someone came up to me and said, "Oh, you gave my partner, my wife, her first break. You were the company that stocked her, and she'd invented a gadget for children." But we were very happy, and we used to work with these entrepreneurs, very small companies, often mothers or parents who'd come up with the idea, and we used to work with them and show them how to explain to them what a Euro tag was for sort of hanging things in stores, go through how to package, how to get through trading standards, how to would do your intellectual property registrations. And so we'd really work with people and bring a lot of entrepreneurs with us. But I think the whole idea with Jojo was that we were small, we were lean. Until the day I sold the company, when we turned over 71 million, we really, I had an open door policy. Anyone could come to me at any time. I answered my own email. So it does, I think having a lean company like that just means that you can stay ahead of the competition. And it cuts out an awful lot of not just expense in the business when you have a lean company, but it makes it smoother and faster, and it cuts out a lot of miscommunication. So we always advocate small teams and a very, very sort of a steep pyramid. Your hierarchy levels. Don't have too many managers in your business, because more managers mean more confusion, more heads, more big heads, more people with grand ideas. So, I hate to say it, but I would make a very good benevolent dictator.
Actually, it leads on to my next question beautifully. How important do you think it is to your team around you? How important is it to build the right team around you?
Well, I think the right team is vital. It's really, really vital. And, I had two directors who were with me pretty much throughout the process. One was the design director, the other the marketing director, and they were absolutely instrumental. Not only did they have the same ethos as I did. We're all sort of very hardworking, kind of non-hierarchical, kind of grammar school girls in the old sense, which probably will mean nothing to the younger generation. But we just didn't have any airs and graces. We continued to take the tube to go to meetings till the day we sold the company.
When we met, you came in on a bicycle.
Exactly. Well, they'd take the tube and I'd meet them on my bike. Yeah. So, my marketing director and my design director had come to me straight from university to help me out when I was doing everything myself. My marketing director came to me when we were a medium-sized company, but not a large company, and she just really helped. And the three of us we just spoke the same language. And actually, I had other directors in the team who were also incredibly important, but they weren't as vital as those two and as instrumental as those two. And so I do think finding the right team is really important, but also you need to trust people. You need to, whilst I sort of joke that I was a benevolent dictator, I also didn't need to dictate to them because we spoke the same language. So they knew we didn't have to go through things. They knew that by the time we kind of got to the company to a stage where I was no longer able to make all the decisions because it just physically wasn't the time in the day, they knew that they had my trust and that they would be able to make those decisions. And, and sometimes we argued about things, and sometimes, quite often they would win on subjects that I disapproved of. But I think it's important to have the right team around you. But also don't be scared. Don't be scared that, some members of your team who may have been there a very long time start maybe controlling you a little bit, especially if you're a sole business person. You may find that some people actually think they're more important than they are. And I felt that sometimes over the years there were, that I had very valuable members of staff who were doing important jobs, but actually they maybe pushed me in directions I didn't necessarily want to go, or maybe put too much pressure and control over me that I found overbearing. And I would probably say that I would probably say that there were times when I let things go where I should have really dealt with them. And so I don't think one should worry. I became very concerned that my core team would leave, because partly that just puts so much work on me. When you have a director leave or a director goes on maternity leave, the reality is, even with a company that's turning over 70 million, the CEO, the managing director, has to pick up the slack. Even if you may get a maternity cover or something, you're picking up the slack. And I think sometimes I would pander to people a little bit too much. So I think sometimes you need to realize that actually most jobs are replaceable, so just there are good people out there. If you find good people the first time, you'll find them again.
And actually, that's a great point. As a sole business founder, how did you get your sort of sanity checks when you're in those situations and you're by yourself because you're at the top? What did you use to try and sort of recenter yourself?
I mean, I think as a board, we did lean on each other, and and I tried to always be there for everyone. So I think I know my board lent on me, and human beings, we all go through ups and downs, and there's some years when one director or one senior manager was really struggling because of a life event. People have children, they have parents, they have dogs or whatever that are going through a bad stage, and so I think we did support each other, and I think my board supported me. I mean, there were times when I was completely just completely exhausted. I got very ill on a couple of occasions, which was one of the reasons I really had to retire from that business and sell the company, because I really couldn't keep going. But I think we did support each other, and I'm quite a resilient human being, so I didn't feel that I particularly, I'm not a great one for sort of self-help. I'm more one to just kind of work your way through the problem and just drink a strong cup of black coffee.
I thought you were going to say something different then.
or down a bottle of wine and see how, creativity comes back, you find a solution. But I actually enjoy, you see, it's actually ironic, because the worst times in our company history, when we had, one time we had a go live situation with a new software, which was a total disaster, and we literally couldn't bank for 6 weeks, and it was just a disaster.
Crumbs.
There was one time I think someone's credit card was charged 55 times or something. It was absolutely horrendous.
Yeah.
Obviously it stopped happening, but this new system we were putting in, and I mean, my solution to that was, right, okay, I've got to do something about it. And I did get rid of the IT director who'd put in this new system, and I moved into the IT team, and I sat in IT for the next 2.5 years with my desk in the team. And because I just didn't trust anyone else, they nearly put us out of business, and I had trusted someone who wasn't able to do the job competently, and at that stage I had to learn a bit about IT, and I winged it. I don't know very much about IT, but at least I could be there to sense check all the decisions. But another time, when we had a lot of, you in business, especially in omni-channel business, you veer from problem to problem, and the reality is, when there wasn't a problem, I was getting a bit bored. Some of my sort of happiest times were when the business, happiest but also very, very worrying times, when the business was growing so fast, or we were incredibly busy, and I had to really get back onto the shop floor. So COVID was one of those situations. I was terrified that we were going to, the early lockdowns. I was terrified that we were going to have a COVID outbreak in the workplace, and we had quite an elderly workforce. We very loyal to our workforce, and our workforce were very loyal to us. So in our distribution center, we had quite an aging workforce. And, if you think about it, I started the company at 26, and I'd been there by COVID. I'd been there 28 years, 20 or 27 years. And some of my first employees were still there. So we put a lot of people on furlough. And then, of course, there was a lull for about 2 days, and then everyone panicked. And it was like the world was panic buying of everything. And actually, I remember there was a stage when I decided we had to bring in people. Everyone was on furlough, and we had to bring in lots of people to cope with demand. And I advertised on a website or a Facebook group that used to recruit staff for festivals. Of course, all the festivals had been cancelled. So I was training 20 people in a go around the warehouse, and I worked in the warehouse 2 shifts a day for most of that first year of COVID. But on one side, it was incredibly stressful, very exhausting. But on the other side, it was just hugely satisfying to see that we could run an optimized ship with a lot of casual teams. And we had some fantastic days. Our productivity levels were unbelievably good, because the people who weren't on furlough were really, really committed and just worked incredibly hard. Having a good team, as you asked earlier, is half the battle in any type of company.
Yeah, I remember you telling us that story about COVID, and it just it's such an inspirational story that you got in there, and the show has to go on, I suppose.
Oh, it does. Also, it's a great time to be innovative. I mean, I hate to say some people obviously took advantage of it, and there were some horrendous stories of people taking advantage of it. But I mean, there was a time when baby-friendly hand sanitizer was kind of in amazing demand.
Yeah.
And I remember I got a van full. I got a van, went to the factory. He had a factory who'd been selling us hand sanitizer. And I said, right, I need as many as you can get. I will take everything you can get. And they said, well, we're going to lockdown on Monday. If you can get me a van over the weekend, we will load the van up with everything we've got. You can have it. So I was driving around in the company van for a whole weekend full of hand sanitizer when hand sanitizer was was being sold.
It's like a black market.
Yeah. I was so terrified that the van was going to be stolen.
Most valuable van you've ever had.
So I was nearly set in the van overnight, and then I drove the van to the warehouse, and it all went. The day I unloaded the van, it all went out the door. So
it's just gone. So talk to us about the decision to sell the business then, because I can tell you're still incredibly passionate about your experiences.
Yeah. Well, I mean, the truth is, I'd had sepsis quite badly the year before COVID. Just being silly, I got sepsis, and I was very ill, and so the sort of mortality rate in sepsis is, I think, around about 30%. It's not great. So I had renal sepsis, and I wasn't very well. And after that, I was drinking sort of 2 litres of water a day, and still working very hard. Then I worked incredibly hard through COVID, and the second year of COVID, I did catch COVID, and having had sort of this not very good sepsis, I had a really bad COVID. And at the time, I remember my son's taking me to this bizarre sort of clinic, which was like on the outskirts of London somewhere, when everyone was in lockdown, and my son taking me to this clinic where everyone was in white suits, and my son being in tears. My son is 6'4", and he's a great big strappy man. He looks like a bouncer. Very, very gorgeous boy. But he's not one to be sort of. And he was sobbing in tears while he took me into this clinic. And I really was in a pretty bad way. You couldn't get an ambulance at that time, so he'd driven me to this place. And I remember him crying, and as we were sitting there, and me barely being able to breathe. And I actually just thought, why do I do this? Why, why for the last year, since I knew having sepsis wasn't a good thing to have, and then with COVID, I pushed myself, and I didn't want to let anyone down. So I would try and be there for the early shift, which started at 6, and stay till the late shift, which ended at 10. And and I just didn't really like the idea of making people come to work during COVID and not being there myself, and leading from the front. And I just knew that I couldn't really run a company any other way. So I actually thought, well, the truth is, either I have to give up Jojo, or Jojo will kill me. And so that's kind of what happened. And it was really hard. The only sort of saving grace was I had given growth shares to, we had some profit share schemes and some growth shares to not everyone in the company, and I did my best to find a reputable buyer. I sold to Next, which is a great British buyer. It's a great brand. They've got a good ethos, and of course, not everything happens the way you want after a sale, and it's very difficult to. But they do things differently to me, and I think the brand's doing well. I understand it's one of the best-selling brands on the Next website, and but it's sad. It'll never be the same Jojo as the one I ran, but it could be bigger and better. I think we should all accept our own limits, and I can't run a big company. I cannot run a company where I don't have an open door policy. But when you're doing that with up to 1,000 staff over 3 continents, you're basically, and you're working 7 days a week, 24 hours a day, it's going to kill you. It's not so.
Yeah, there's only so long you can go.
And it was really interesting. After I sold Jojo, I was off several non-exec directorships, and I had to say, I don't know how to run a big company. I can't be a director on a board. I can be a director on my board, and I can sell my ship. But actually, I'm going to go back into small business, where I'm back to being the benevolent dictator and doing it all myself again.
So you, unlike some people, have gone again. So Laura, tell us about what you're doing now.
So Wonderful Escapes is it's It is a business, and I'm far too proud a business person to run a vanity project. So on a operational level, it has to be profitable. On a capex level, we'll see. So, but I have this incredible farm on the Scourge, which I had bought several years before, really just as a sort of long-term investment, not quite sure what to do with it. And it's just a very large, extensive medieval farm it had a lot of outbuildings. And I'd been gradually doing it up, really to save it from sort of falling into the valley. And over the years, I'd made holiday lets in the different areas. I'm sitting here now in one of the buildings. And I decided after I made this sort of transition from a highly stressful sort of pseudo corporate life, because even though Jojo was far from corporate, I was working in that environment. To being where I really felt that I wasn't quite sure what was wrong with me, but I had this lump in my throat for about 2 years. I had this, maybe 4 years. I couldn't really breathe. And I suddenly, after Jojo, I knew I was going to do something. I wasn't quite sure what. And initially I thought I was going to do something with organic food and local food production, because I just can't stand food waste. And I have always, Jojo was an ethical fashion company. We were one of the first certified B corporations, and we had really good ethos. And but I just wasn't entirely sure what I was going to do, and I needed to learn to breathe again. And I just found that when I came up to the farm, and I would sort of be designing new gardens, because I do all the design up here. And I'd taken a very muddy hillside farm, and we've created sort of about 6 acres of beautiful gardens. And I would come up here and I just learned to breathe. And as you come into the farm, on the side of the drive, I found this statue, which you can't see me, but my arms are spread wide, a bit like sort of the Angel of the North, and it's looking to the sky. And I just feel that I want to teach people to learn how to breathe again. So this project is a business, but it's also a form of social enterprise, not in the legal sense, but in the sort of common sense, in that I want to bring people up here in various guises and get them to be immersed in nature, whilst having a fantastic, fabulous hen party, or whilst coming on a painting retreat, a yoga retreat, a business bonding session, or just a family holiday. So what we offer is we can accommodate up to about 50 people across different parts of the farm. So we have sort of four different areas of the farm that can be rented out independently or together. Anything from a romantic cabin for a couple with a gorgeous copper bath, which actually I'm designing at the moment and I'm really enjoying it. It is the perfect romantic getaway cabin, which will be ready in about probably October or so, and maybe November, to a large farmhouse that can sleep up to 23 people, or you take the whole place. And so we're open to anyone and anything, apart from I don't do weddings and I don't do noisy parties. There are plenty of local people around here who do that, and I'm very happy for people, wedding parties to stay here, but they go away to vomit in someone else's flower beds. They don't do that here. So because and we have a natural swimming pool. We're fully organic. The wildlife that you see here is extraordinary. I have a tawny owl who flies through in the early evenings. I have a little weasel that comes and squeals at me when I'm gardening. And it's just a really, really beautiful place. And it's 2 hours from London. And I get very frustrated that Wales is a really well-kept secret, particularly Monmouthshire. Only 2.4% of inbound travellers to the UK come to Wales. And as a result, it's incredible. On a bank holiday weekend, you can climb my mountain, which is just behind the farm, and from the top see 7 counties, and you might not see another human being. You might see a few sheep, but so it's just my plan now is really to get Monmouthshire on the map, but only to the extent that we don't ruin it. I don't want to become the Cotswolds.
I mean, it sounds idyllic, and Monmouthshire is absolutely beautiful. Yeah. Do you feel very settled there?
I do, although my home is London. My family, my extended family, my original family are all Welsh. And so Jojo always had a base here, because when I started the company, my first so-called warehouse was a shed of my parents, because I was living in a flat share in London. So I couldn't really keep that much stock under my bed. But so my kids and their father are in London, but I'm here in Wales, and I commute back and forwards. I tend to be here a lot of the time, and it is just the most beautiful project. And of course, I do a lot of building work. I do all the design work. We run painting courses and yoga retreats, and so people can come, and as I say, they can come on a family holiday and rent the whole place. In fact, I don't think we almost ever had someone who hasn't rebooked in one guise or another either come on a family holiday and then come back on one of the yoga retreats, or come on a yoga retreat and then say, well, I'm going to bring my girls or my family here. So it's really nice to kind of create this community here. And I mean, the business itself is something that it's a small business. It can only grow as far as and when I first sold Jojo, I thought I'd do loads of these. Wonderful Escapes was going to be, I couldn't believe that no one had taken Wonderful Escapes as a business name, by the way. Lucky breaks that you're looking for a business name and you think, oh my goodness, that's available, grab it. So I thought I'd do loads of them, but actually I kind of have worked out that no, whilst I'm really, really ambitious for this, and I'm really ambitious for Welsh tourism now, I personally don't want to go any further. And I have a fantastic camper van called Eloise, who is available to rent as well. And I'm keen to spend time in Eloise, the camper van, and traveling around the countryside. And we're just buying 2 miniature donkeys, and I'm very lucky.
Before we finish up, for anybody who is running a business or starting a business, could you give us just one piece of advice that you'd pass on?
Well, do you know what? I think in this digital age, the most important thing for trust is people. And I think it's really interesting how more and more companies are becoming a little, well, you've got half the companies that have a sort of fake story and you don't really trust the story behind the brand. And then you've got the other half who are fairly faceless and you never quite know, is this brand based in the UK? Am I buying direct from China? Is it even a scam? An awful lot of, and I think what we really need to build a business now is something to trust. So I do ironically believe that a physical presence to your business with brand consistency, your business, whatever, if it's a consumer business, it's going to be digital, it's going to be omni-channel. But I think having that physical presence of some type or a showroom, I think it's really interesting. But one of the things that I found with the Jojo stores was the Jojo stores, towards the end of my time at the company, they didn't all make money. But my God, the online presence around those stores was strong. Yeah. And just having that physical store where people could come in for advice or even could drive past and never go in, but they knew that the store was there if there was a problem, just authenticated the business and meant it, and it authenticated the business and meant that people would trust us. So I believe that people are more important than ever in this digital age.
Oh, Laura, thank you so much. Thank you so much for your time. Thank you for joining us. This has been Inspired Sounds.
Thank you for joining us today. We hope you've enjoyed listening and watching. To tune in and meet our next exciting guest in the Inspired Sounds series, press the follow and subscribe button. Goodbye.